Hi, it's Dr. Steve from Misericordia University. In today's online class, let's consider managing problem behaviors. In this class, let's look at levels of problem behavior. Let's consider some interventions. Let's examine some strategies for managing problem behaviors and also teacher defiance problems. There are many different approaches to classroom management. They range anywhere from the historic and foundational approaches such as behavior modification of Skinner or reality therapy from Glasser, all the way down to the modern classroom management strategies of Harry and Rosemary Wong. While there are many different approaches to classroom management, there also are different similarities. So let's look at some of the different approaches and attempt to organize them or classify them into a more easily understandable structure. The structure I have presented here, in general, we find that classroom management issues can be not serious and range all the way up to the more serious, and also to the common ones, which are usually the not serious ones, all the way up to the fewer instances, which typically are the more serious behavioral issues. Considering all the different types of behaviors we see in the classroom, one could break it down into four broad categories: non-problems, minor problems, problems that are a little more major but they're contained, or a major problem that is starting to spread around the classroom. Let's briefly look at each of these. The lowest level of classification is what I'm going to call a non-problem. Well, these are common behavior things. They're brief. They don't really interfere with instruction. Examples of these are minor talking, brief off-task activities by a few students. These common behaviors a teacher can, in general, ignore, because if you were to deal with every single instance of a minor issue like this, it would really interrupt teaching and learning, and would also be a drain on the teacher as well as the students. To move up to a little bit higher level of behavior issue is a minor problem. When we talk about a minor problem, we're talking about students going against classroom rules or the procedures that you've taught the class. But they're not really seriously interfering with learning. But nevertheless, it is something that you can't let slip by. So examples of this would be students calling out, leaving their seats, passing notes, not just doing a little brief talking, but more extended talking, eating during class, or other off-task activities. Again, you don't want to let this behavior slip by. It should be noticed and it should be addressed, because if you don't, it could spread around your room, it could affect teaching and learning, and it could undermine your overall classroom management system. Third classification is a major problem, but it is contained, at least for now. So these types of activities are disruptive, and they are interfering with teaching and learning. But for now, they're limited to just one or maybe a few students. Examples of this type of behavior would be students who refuse to do work, students who are obviously breaking classroom rules, people who are chronically off task, students getting up and deciding to just walk around the room and talk. You could see a lack of order starting to happen here. But again, right now, it's contained, so this definitely has to be addressed. And if you don't address those types of problems, then the major problem starts to spread around the room and it infects, so to speak, more students. So a major problem spreading is any problem behavior that becomes commonplace. It starts to become the norm. It's a threat to the order in the classroom. So examples of this type of behavior would be students just roaming around the room, students talking back, students in general starting to refuse more and more to comply with what the teacher requests. So what do you do about these behavior issues? Let's now turn our focus toward interventions. Let's consider minor, moderate, and then more extensive intervention. For those non-issues, those minor problems, consider not stopping instruction. Don't call a lot of attention to these activities. Instead, try using nonverbal cues. Remember that sometimes people go off task because you're a little too slow in terms of the pace of your activity. Speed it up a little bit. Use a very powerful tool in your arsenal, and that is your teacher presence. Everyone else is sitting down, you're standing up. You're now the tallest person in the room, and you have authority. Use your presence. Walk over near the student or students who are doing these minor off-task activities. If you need to, redirect a student's behavior by saying something like, everyone should be doing whatever at this time. You can ask students to stop the behavior. You can frame it as a choice. You can say, you can choose this, but if you continue, you're going to be actually choosing this type of consequence. You can use an I message. When you do X, it causes this other thing, and I feel. In other words, you can talk about what you feel and what you're experiencing, or what other students are experiencing because of these behaviors. These are appropriate for those non-problems, those common little issues. If the off-task behavior tends to increase, then it might call for more moderate interventions. Think about withholding a privilege or some desired activity with the ability for the students to earn it back. Think about isolating or removing, separating out certain students who are causing the issue. Think about, is there a way you can impose a penalty, if you will, or a fine? Now, in some cases, some teachers will say, we'll punish you, so to speak, by giving you an extra assignment. In other words, we'll give you some more of our content because you'll certainly not like that. So think about the kind of message you'll send if you decide that your penalty or fine will deal with academic work, because it may send the wrong message that you don't really intend to send at all. You could give students a detention. And most students would like to avoid this if they can. When they go to a detention, it will limit extra attention to the situation and to them. So that could be not desirable for many students. And also, it can allow room for you to conference with that student. And of course, you can always send a student to the principal's office if needed. If you are experiencing more serious behaviors or major problem starting to spread around, it may call for more extensive interventions. One of the more powerful interventions that you can use with the student is an individual contract. You can discuss the problem with the student and ask them why. In other words, individually, get them away from the class, conference with them, and rely on the rapport and the relationship that you have with that student. Look them in the eye and say, what's going on here? Let's talk real here. Let's talk turkey, so to speak. And then with the student, seek to identify some possible solutions. What can we do to curb this activity for the future? And then together agree on a course of action. In the process, specify expected changes in behavior, what the consequences will be if those are not met, and think about including an incentive for the student as well, because they're still students. They're not adults. We would like to nurture them and help them. And remember that one of the three main purposes for classroom management is to help students learn to ultimately manage themselves. Another more extensive intervention would be a conference with a parent or a guardian. You can tell the parent that you'd appreciate their support in resolving the problem. In the process, be careful so you don't make the parent feel defensive or responsible, but rather objectively try to just isolate what the student's behavior is, try to determine what's happening, and see if you can garner their support, and let them know what you're trying to do to help their family out. In the process, determine if maybe a phone or in-person meeting is warranted. Maybe you could handle some things through email or through some other ways. Base your decision on knowing something about the student and the parent or guardian. Because realize some parents may overreact, some parents may be defensive. While modern researchers have a lot of good things to say about conferencing with students and working with them individually, I'm going to look back for a moment at some foundational work, which I think explains it very clearly. The reality therapy model of William Glasser. He says, demonstrate caring and personal interest in the student. You have a rapport and a relation with that student. Conference with that student. Ask very, very directly, what's happening? What's going on? In the process, help the student accept responsibility for their behavior and help the student evaluate his or her behavior. How is this behavior hurting others? How is it hurting you? Develop a plan or written contract, and then have the student commit to the plan by writing and signing their name, and then follow through, monitor and follow through to make sure that the behavior will change over time. Now, while most teachers will experience, as I pointed out in my diagram at the beginning of this presentation, most teachers will experience the more common behaviors, the non-issues, the non-problems, nothing serious, and will experience that a whole lot more frequently. It is true that once in a while you may experience a more severe problem behavior. So let's now turn our focus toward examining strategies for managing these problem behaviors. One behavior that you're more likely to experience is having a student clown around in your class. Gutman says if you determine the source of the clowning, that can be very helpful in determining what to do about it. Some possible reasons for the clowning. A student might be trying to cover up some deficiency on their part. They may try to achieve some kind of popularity or gain attention from fellow students. They might be trying to simply vent frustrations from school or from home. So when we look at this, what can you do about it? Well, Gutman suggests keep a record to help you understand what that cause of the behavior is, and then meet privately with that student and try to help the student determine how to meet those needs, whatever those are determined to be, without being so disruptive in the classroom. You may experience cheating by students somewhere in your career. Some possible causes. Maybe the teacher's expectations of the students are perceived to be too high. Maybe the student is having trouble mastering the material. They don't feel they can really accomplish that. They didn't prepare, or for some reason feel not prepared. Maybe they didn't study enough. Maybe they have test anxiety and they're fearful that their brain will shut down when they're taking the test. So some possible treatments. Capitalize on your relationship, your rapport with the student. Meet privately with that student, one-on-one. Try to find out what the cause is, and then explain the consequences for future cheating. So you want to deter them from cheating. At the same time, you want to try to determine what is causing that behavior right now. You can always ask the student to complete that test or that assignment, whatever it is, and repeat it. So do it again, but this time under controlled circumstances where you can monitor so that cheating will not be able to occur. You might experience a student lying to you directly. Some possible causes for this behavior. The student might be trying to protect his or her self-image. They might be trying to hide different weaknesses or vulnerabilities that they have. The opposite, they might be trying to inflate their image in front of peers and others. Also, they might simply be trying to protect themselves from being punished, from having to deal with the consequences of something. Some possible actions. Well, express your concern about their need to lie. Again, rely on your rapport on your relationship with that student. Say something like, "I wonder why you couldn't talk to me directly. Like, why couldn't you tell me what really happened? I thought we could speak at that level." And then, after determining what's happening, help the student determine how not to lie in the future, how to take other courses of action rather than that. At some point, you may experience a student stealing from the school or from another student. Some causes are they're impulsive. Our society today says when you want something, you should get it now. It may be due to revenge. Maybe a student takes something because they're angry with someone else. And it could be that they don't have the resources to obtain this particular item, whatever it is, and they may not have permission also from their own family to get this. So some possible actions. Again, rely on your rapport with the student. Talk one-on-one. Have the student return the item, have them replace that item, or have them make restitution. Show them that there are consequences for various behaviors that we as adults may do. Help the student think through what other options could they have rather than stealing and taking something from someone else. Depending how serious the situation is and how large, you may need to contact the office. You may even need to contact their family. You might experience at some point in class a student using profanity, profane language. Some possible causes. Well, younger students may repeat what they see on TV. They might be mimicking what their friends do. It might be some behavior that they've seen in their family. Older students tend to use profanity more compared to younger students when they're angry with somebody. And it may have become part of their regular language, and they see nothing wrong with it. So some possible actions. Discuss language like that with students, again, one-on-one, and tell them what is acceptable and what's not appropriate in school. Stress that using language to hurt others is not going to be tolerated in your class. And then help students talk through and determine more acceptable ways to express their anger. You are likely to find some students who are trying to inappropriately use electronic devices or trying to use electronic devices during inappropriate times. Some actions that you can take. First, realize that for adolescents, for many of our students, the ability to have their own personal device is a source of their control in their lives and a source of their independence. So they may react very strongly if you try to take away that device or disallow them from using it for a certain period of time. So considering this, some action you can take is to communicate properly, communicate effectively, and enforce your policies. Your school might have specific policies on use of electronic devices. Make sure you understand them and let students know that you plan to monitor and enforce those policies. Make sure that students understand, so communicate effectively about your policy, about when and how they can use devices in your class. Make sure that they understand consequences that will incur if they violate these procedures and these rules that you have set up, your policies. In the process, you want to help students become self-disciplined in using technology, because when they leave your classroom, what's going to happen when they go into the workforce? What happens when they go into libraries, into churches, and into other places? So again, one of the reasons for, one of the main aims, I should say, for classroom management is to help students be able to manage themselves, to learn how to do this. This is one of those areas where you can really help them. Now let's turn our focus to teacher defiance problems, situations where a student will straight out defy a teacher. If you experience rudeness by a student or students in your class, what are you going to do? Well, first, remind students of your class rules, because you likely already have covered this in the rules. Tell the student that they have to find a more acceptable way to express their feelings rather than being rude to others, whether it's the teacher or to other students. If the student continues that behavior, again, rely on your rapport with the student, with your relationship. Do a one-on-one conference with that student. In that process, realize that some students to you may seem rude, but maybe to them they're not aware of that to them they don't think they are being rude. So have a conference, talk to them, don't make assumptions, try to understand and help them to understand as well. Open communication. And remember peer pressure. Remember that in front of other students, many adolescents would rather appear to be bad rather than appear to be dumb. In your teaching career, you might experience someone who refuses to do work. Now, one thing you can do about this is check student work all the time. Check it early and check it often to catch this problem. And if someone is refusing to do work, ensure that the student work is reflected in grades. Make sure that anything you're asking the student to do will definitely have an impact on their grade, and then make sure that they understand that. You may have to contact a parent or guardian for help in this area, especially in the case that some of the work that you're asking them to do is done outside of school, of the school day. Another very valuable source of help will be from extracurricular people, from coaches, from other teachers who may work with students outside of class. That's a great source of help. That's a great place where you can seek someone else's mentoring. And one of the big reasons is if someone is involved, let's say, in a particular sport, not only will the coach have, in many cases, have a big influence over the student, but second of all, the coach could deny them to participate because of academic work. If a student happens to react with defiance or hostility and something just kind of blows up all of a sudden, make sure that you avoid a power struggle in front of the class. Do not engage that student in confrontation in front of everybody. Allow time for the student to cool down. Remember, we had talked about de-escalation techniques. De-escalate, allow that student to simmer down a little bit. Remember that they're still children and you're the adult in the room. Redirect the student back to the activity, and then, once again, deal with the problem privately. Rely on your rapport and your relationship with that student. If it's something where if it's an extreme situation or it warrants it, you may have to call the office for help. In response to student defiance of a teacher, one researcher describes an intervention as draw a line in the sand. So to understand this, realize that some students learn from an early age that if they misbehave enough, if they go off task enough, that adults will eventually give in and they will give them what they want. And that starts from a very early age. And throughout their school days, through many years, that may have been reinforced. So you might find some teachers walk on eggshells, so to speak, around that student. And if they're at all on task, they are willing to ignore the smaller behaviors. What some researchers say is do not accept lesser behavior from a disruptive student, one who is historically disruptive and has that reputation. Don't try to buy that student or bribe that type of student. Draw a line in the sand. In other words, say, this is what's acceptable, no matter who you are or what your reputation is. This is what's unacceptable, and I will not take this other type of behavior. So if you're talking to a student who is historically difficult and has that reputation, many times those students receive a whole lot of attention from a teacher. The teacher's trying to help them. And many teachers have tried this. They give them pep talks, they individually conference with them. The thought here is, a number of researchers suggest, don't treat this student any differently than everybody else. Keep these so-called special communications less frequent. Be honest, speak from your gut, make it meaningful. Don't make a big deal when this student complies with the expectations, because they are the expectations. That's what's expected of all students. So why would you go to one student and say, hey, great job that you're complying with anything? After a student makes real improvement, then do something and communicate at other times and build rapport. Again, strengthen your relationship with this and all students. Researchers suggest don't seat a problem student close to you, because then they feel, well, they're a problem student. You're just reinforcing those thoughts. And they might feel that they cannot change their reputation. They're pigeonholed into that. And your hope as a teacher is maybe you can help them change that. Don't spend an inordinate amount of time with them. Don't speak to them differently. Don't ignore any misbehaviors from them any more than you would for anybody else. Don't treat them differently. Treat difficult students as you would treat everybody else in your class. Because you could be communicating that you feel that they're not capable of improving, that you're basically giving up on them. And that's not going to help them. It's also not going to improve classroom management in your class. A couple of final reminders when you're dealing with classroom management issues. Try to handle things locally. In other words, keep it in your classroom. Try to solve everything there if you can, rather than involving the office. If you need to, you can certainly bring the principal's office into play if you need to. But in general, try to handle things right in your own class. Try not to let classroom management become your whole job. Your job is teaching and learning. Don't let that take over. For me, I would not want to be a police officer. I want to be an educator. Remember the hierarchy. Start off non-verbally. Make eye contact. Use a signal. Use your teacher presence. Then you can do some verbal things. You can remind the student. You can redirect. You can ask or tell them to stop a behavior. You can use your expressions and your tone and change it as you communicate. If you need to, then take it up a step and talk privately in conference with the student. If it's more serious and or it's ongoing, you can set up an agreement or a learning contract with that student. If it's very serious and ongoing, and especially if it's something that's serious and demands immediate attention, you might have to involve the office or you might have to contact a family member. Take things one step at a time and don't overreact. In general, be positive with students and maintain a positive atmosphere. Don't focus on the negative and don't let anything interfere with learning, either students' behavior nor your reactions to students' behavior and your interventions. You can not like the behavior, but don't dislike the student. Keep in mind, your student is still a part of your class. So after you correct them and try to bring them back on track again, be welcoming, be supportive. Don't hold a grudge. And hopefully, through today's class, you realize don't take the bad behavior personally. Chances are it has nothing to do with you at all. If a student is off task, there's some reason behind it. Now, can you be a detective? Can you determine what the problem might be? Because if you can, you might be able to help that student in many important ways and help them for their future. The problem could be with the teacher. The problem could be with the student. If it's a student issue, it could be some problem at home. There might be some kind of pressure from somewhere in their lives. It could be with you. Maybe you need to plan better, more engaging, interesting lessons. Maybe you simply have to increase the pace of what you're doing. Whatever you do, be proactive in classroom management. Deal with things straight up. To wrap up today's class and to process through the information that we've considered, you're going to be presented with 5 possible classroom management challenges. In this activity, start by considering some possible causes for each of the 5 behaviors presented. Then, list out some possible strategies that you as a teacher might use to address these challenges. Remember not to overreact. Hope you enjoyed today's class. Look forward to seeing you at our next class.